everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to another episode of #EpicBookRecs. So this is the monthly recommendation series that I do here on the Epic Reads channel, where I tell you about a bunch of YA books based on a certain theme each month. So in previous months we've done a bunch of really exciting themes, so definitely go check out the playlist linked down below if you want to see the rest of those videos. But today's theme is one I'm super excited about because it's based on my favorite genre, and that is fantasy. So today I'll be recommending a bunch of YA fantasies. I tried to find a range of fantasies for you guys, ones that take place in very different kinds of worlds, and ones with different kinds of takes on fantasy. So the first book that I want to recommend to you today is Serpent and Duff by Shelby Mahurin. So this is one that I read earlier in 2019 and absolutely adored. This is a romance slash fantasy between a witch and a witch hunter. The book follows two main characters, Louise LeBlanc and Reed Diggory. So Louise, or Lou as she is called in the book, is fleeing from her coven and she decides to settle in this city called Césarin in France, and it is a place that is rife with kind of witch hate. So she's trying to hide her identity while she lives in the city, but she ends up catching the attention of a witch hunter named Reed Diggory, who has grown up with this doctrine that he must never let a witch live. But in an unlikely situation, Reed and Lou end up in a scandal, and they end up in a fake arranged marriage and end up living together. And this book is a little bit on the older side of YA, but it was so much fun and it had a really wonderful romance, and I just loved the dynamic between the two main characters. Lou is such a funny and hilarious character, and Reed is a very stoic witch hunter, and he is having his whole world kind of turned around by this one girl. There's also a lot of political things going on between the witches and the church and the monarchy, and so that is also a really big element in this book. But overall I feel like it was very focused on those two characters and it was just a lot of fun. The next book that I want to recommend is one that I finished very recently and absolutely loved, and that is The Tiger at Midnight by Swati Thirdala. So this is a fantasy inspired by ancient India, and it's also inspired by some Hindu mythology as well, and I really enjoy this one. This one is also focused on two specific main characters, and it alternates between their two perspectives. The first is Isha, who is this rebel spy, and she's known as the Viper in the legends and stories told between these two neighboring countries called Jhansa and Dwarka. And so she is from Dwarka and she's a rebel spy, and she comes to the Blood Fort based in Jhansa after a very bloody coup, and is trying to assassinate the general there and restore order to these two lands. But in the very first chapter she ends up encountering a soldier in the Blood Fort named Kunal, and he is a very kind of stoic character once again, but he is also someone who is very innocent. He has grown up in the Blood Fort his whole life, and he has been told a lot of things his whole life that has kind of jaded his world view, and so Isha kind of upturns his whole life, and he doesn't know that she's a Viper at the beginning. And when the general is suddenly killed, his commander ends up issuing a challenge to him and his fellow soldiers to go on a mission to capture the Viper. And so this book ends up being this kind of cat and mouse game between Isha and Kunal, neither of them knowing each other's real identities at the beginning, and Kunal trying to go after Isha and Isha trying to run away, and in the midst of all that falling in love. I really love the relationship between Isha and Kunal, but I also really loved the world in general. It was really interesting and rich, and I feel like there's a lot of potential for where it's going to go in the later books. And I also just really loved some of the side characters in this book as well, and it was just a lot of fun seeing the dynamic between Isha and Kunal and how that kind of affects their greater world. Absolutely love this. Really recommend if you're looking for a South Asian inspired fantasy. The next fantasy that I want to recommend to you is Kingdom of Souls by Raina Barron. So this is a West African inspired fantasy, and it is a fantasy that kind of blows your mind and goes in so many unexpected directions. This is one that I didn't know what to expect going into it, but it was honestly so insane and so intense, and also a quite dark fantasy as well. So in this book, our main character Ara is born into a family of very powerful witch doctors. Both of her parents are from very powerful tribes, but they now live in the city under the power of the Orisha gods. But the tribes follow a different god named Heka, and so Ara has always been waiting for her magic to kind of manifest in herself, because everyone knows in the tribes if you have powerful magical parents then you are bound to be magical as well. But as the years go by and Ara continues to not show any magic of her own, she starts to kind of resent herself, and she knows that her mother is constantly disappointed in her for not having magic. And so Ara is in this very difficult spot, but after yet another birthday when she doesn't manifest any magic, her grandmother kind of tries to do a reading on her and discovers that there's possibly a demon kind of blocking her magic, and also with an eye on Ara as a potential victim. And when Ara returns to the city and finds out that the young children there are slowly getting snatched away and going missing, she thinks that it's the demon that her mother saw in the vision, and so she makes it her personal mission to kind of bring down this demon and stop what's happening to these children, because one of those children was one of her really good friends. And so Ara ends up going to extreme limits to kind of protect the people that she cares about. There's also a really kind of rife and intense relationship with her mother as well in this book. And this book also had some really great side characters as well. I absolutely loved the main love interest, but I do feel like Ara's own story is the main focus of the book, and it was just so crazy and intense, and the magic in this book is just really interesting. There are conflicting and different mythologies and gods going on in this book, and you are also getting some perspectives from them, which is interesting. But there's also the magic and rituals of the witch doctors, which is super interesting to read about and see, and Ara kind of delving into that world is just so interesting. But one of the kind of magics that she ends up delving into is that of the charlatans, where they trade years of their lives to gain magic because they don't have any of their own. So if you wanted a darker, intense kind of fantasy with a really interesting mother-daughter relationship, I would definitely recommend this one. On a lighter note, I thought I'd recommend My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. So this isn't really a traditional fantasy, I would say. This is one that kind of borderlines into a historical fantasy, and so this follows our main character, Lady Jane Grey. So this is an alternate take on history. So in history, Lady Jane was queen for I think about 8 days before she was killed, and it takes place during the kind of era of Henry VIII. Lady Jane Grey is a cousin of King Edward, and this book starts with King Edward finding out that he's dying and that he needs to find someone to replace him on the throne, but he doesn't want to give the throne to either of his sisters. So he thinks that Lady Jane Grey, his childhood friend and also someone he might have a little bit of a crush on, is the best choice for the throne. And so with the advisement of his advisor Lord Dudley, he decides to marry Jane off to Lord Dudley's son, who is known to be kind of a womanizer in court, but you find out that he's actually suffering from a curse, which leads into kind of the political climate of this book. So there are these people in this version of history called Ethians, who are people who can shapeshift into a specific animal, but because of the kind of tense political climate, there's many people who are against Ethians and who don't believe that they are equal citizens, and so that's why Edward really believes that he needs to get Lady Jane Grey on the throne. So Lord Dudley's son Gifford is actually an Ethian, and he's a horse by day and a boy by night, and so he spends his night going to poetry readings and reading out his poetry to people and composing his poetry, and it's all very sweet. And so him and Lady Jane end up in an unlikely marriage, and there is a sinister plot that kind of gets uncovered at court, and these three characters are kind of tumbling around each other and trying to get their bearings while also harboring a kind of love triangle as well. So this was a really fun, interesting take on history, but also had a kind of fantastical element to it, which was super fun. All right, the next book that I want to recommend is one of my all-time favorite fantasies, and that is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. So this is a really epic fantasy. It follows multiple main characters with POV chapters, but basically in this world, the Martial Empire has kind of taken over everywhere. And so the book opens with our main character, Elia, who's kind of grown up knowing that she should never kind of go against the Martial Empire. But when her brother is arrested for colluding with rebel spies, she ends up running away from everything that she knows and joining up with the rebels in order to find a way to save her brother. And so she is put on a mission to infiltrate a military academy in the heart of the Martial Empire, and she ends up meeting our other main character, Elias, who's the son of a very high-ranking official in the Martial Empire, and he is training to become something called a mask in the Martial Empire. So they have these masks, and they're kind of trained soldiers, assassins, who carry out a lot of the very harsh orders of the Martial Empire. But Elias harbors this secret disloyalty to the Martial Empire, and he is planning to run away. But things start to get complicated when Elia shows up at the military academy, and Elias is forced to decide whether he wants to just run away or actually face the horrible problems that are going on within the Martial Empire. These two characters just start in a very different place than where they end up towards the end of the book, and it's just one of the best examples of really amazing character development, and so I always love recommending this book. There are also some really interesting side characters as well and villains in this book who have very complex backstories and really interesting reasons for being the way they are. So I really recommend this if you want something very sprawling. You know, these characters traveled great distances in the later books, and they are also so layered, so you never know who is really on the right side. All right, the next one that I want to recommend is another one of my all-time favorites, and that is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is a fantasy that took me by surprise. It is so magical and wonderful and whimsical in many ways, but it's also very deep and harrowing as well. If you've ever watched the movie Atlantis: The Lost Empire, this book is very similar to that, but it follows our main character Laszlo Strange, who is an orphan who has grown up in this monastery and then later in a library, and he's always grown up on these stories of this lost city called Weep. And so the city was actually not called Weep. Its original name was stolen away by a curse, and so now Weep is all that is left. And so Laszlo has always wanted to know more about this lost city and the people who lived there and the kind of legends and stories that he's heard. And so when a delegation from the lost city of Weep comes to his hometown looking for people to take back to their city to solve a problem in their city, Laszlo kind of jumps on this opportunity. This book features lost gods and children of gods and the consequences of war and war crimes. And so there's a very beautiful romance as well. There are dreams in this book. There's a magical character in this book who releases moths from her mouth and gives beautiful dreams to the people in the city of Weep. And it's just a really interesting fantasy, so I highly recommend. It's hard to say a lot about this book without spoiling it or feeling like you're ruining the magic of it. I definitely think it's one that you need to just pick up without knowing a lot and just kind of immerse yourself in it. Alright, and the last book that I want to recommend to you today is Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nagan. So this is a wonderfully, beautifully told Asian-inspired fantasy. It features different classes of people by different animal characteristics. So the lowest caste is the paper caste, and the highest class is the demon moon caste. So this book is set in a country that is ruled by the demon king, and so every year he takes a select few paper girls to be his kind of concubines, and he uses them for a year and then discards them afterwards. And so our main character is a kind of insignificant poor girl, but she has a very unique set of golden eyes, and so she is chosen to become one of these paper girls. But despite the odds, the main character starts to kind of find love with another one of the paper girls, and they're trying to survive in this horrible situation. And it's honestly such a beautifully told romance, but also a tale of survival as well. There are a few content warnings for sexual assault and rape, so be aware of that, but it was overall a really beautifully magical story, and I just love seeing the different kind of castes and their different animal aspects, but also a bit of the magic in this world as well. There's a lot of court intrigue as well in this book because much of it does take place in court, so that's also an interesting aspect of this book. But those are all the books that I wanted to recommend to you today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I love every single book on this list, and fantasy has always been one of my favorite genres. I just love being transported into another world to see characters deal with problems much larger than my own. So I really hope that you found a book that you would love to pick up soon. And as always, I love hearing your recommendations as well, so please leave me a comment with one of your favorite YA fantasies. There's a bunch here that I didn't mention that are also my faves because there's only enough time that I have in one of these videos. So please leave me your YA fantasy recommendations down below so we can all kind of get some new books to read. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode of #EpicBookRecs. Bye!